Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to debrief what was an important and an eventful vote last night by the Minneapolis School Board. But Heather, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good today. How are you?
I'm good. The sun is now coming out over by me, so that's nice. And yeah, we're here after a really, really important discussion about the superintendent, his evaluation, and his impending contract extension. So let's get into it. So last night, the school board, if you haven't caught our shorter video, um, the school board actually decided that they wanted to extend the superintendent's contract for another 3 to 5 years, is what it sounded like. Director Ellison talked a little bit about, like, right before they voted on whether to extend the contract of the superintendent. He said, like, she said, think about, if is this the leader that you want for the next 3 to 5 years in Minneapolis public schools? And five of the votes said that they did want to have this leader in charge of Minneapolis public schools for the next 3 to 5 years. So that's where we're at. And so, just as a little bit of context, the school board, the most important role and duty of the school board is to hire, manage, evaluate, and ultimately fire a superintendent. Like, that is the most important responsibility. Everything else kind of comes second to that. And so last night, the board carried out its most important duty by evaluating the superintendent, giving him high marks in 3 out of 4 areas. And then five of the board members said, yes, we want this superintendent to move forward. And so that's where we're at for the next 3 to 5 years potentially. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what does that mean for a superintendent who has 9 board members and has almost half of the board members say they do not have confidence in him. What does that mean for anything he decides to propose moving forward? What does that mean for students across our district? What does that mean for parents and families? We just wanted to dissect it, and we haven't really processed that at all together. So we're just going to kind of go off the cuff here. But Heather, when I asked that question, what does a 5-4 mean for Superintendent Graff? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes you wonder. Like, I guess if you were thinking a little more 6-3 or 7-2, you'd go, okay, we have a really unified board getting ready to move forward, right? If I'm a superintendent looking at a board vote like that, I might wonder if this is a board I can continue to lead through my agenda for the next 3 years. And I might I might really start to think about, like, whoa, where do these four folks not see that I'm the person, and what would that look like? And I think I mean, so I it's an interesting thing. To This board was clearly split on this decision, and on long different lines of the CDD vote too, which is, I think, is another thing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see, will they be able to bring cohesion through this?
Yep. Yeah. I thought it was super interesting, and I'm glad that you brought up the CDD vote, because you had one person who supported the CDD say that they did not want to have, or two people that supported the CDD said they did not want to extend this contract with the superintendent. And then one person who voted against the CDD said that they did want to extend the contract. And so, yeah, it wasn't along CDD lines. It wasn't along anything. It was just kind of a interesting split for the vote. And for those who do not know how the vote went, for those who supported the superintendent, it was directors Arneson, Inns, directors Caprini, director Jourdain, and director Ellison. And then for those who voted to not move forward with the superintendent, it was director Cerrillo, director Elamine, director Pauly, and director Ali.
Yeah.
So, it was a really interesting split. A lot of people who have lots of different relationships at different points within Minneapolis public schools, and yeah, it's messy. That's I guess that's the best way to really talk about it. What I think I'm concerned about with a 5-4 vote in this way, and like you said, it wasn't along CDD lines, and honestly, this board has been pretty unified on most votes up until, this point, right? Like starting from the start of this calendar year where directors Elamine and director Cerrillo joined this board, like there haven't been many split votes. It's been
Mm-mm.
mainly unanimous, if I remember correctly. Um, and so to see this fracture around, again, kind of their most responsible or their most important responsibility was interesting, and is going to be really it's going to be crucial that we pay attention to see how this plays out, because what my concern is this superintendent has done a relatively good job around things that are being done that are pretty big across the district. This superintendent will go to the board and like get the board's stamp of approval. If he doesn't feel like he has that support from the board, things that aren't necessarily a board responsibility, he may say like, I'll get your input, but I don't need your votes, right? I don't need you to bring this to us unless the board specifically asks for this to come in front of them. And I think some of the board members really do have this idea that like, look, we don't want to actually be as involved as you want us to be in some of your decision making. So it'll be interesting to see how much of the superintendent's agenda will actually come in front of the board now moving forward, because of maybe a perceived lack of support. Um, so I think that's something to really keep an eye on, and to say like, hey, does this literacy plan need to be approved by the board? I think technically it does not need to be. I'm sure the board wants an update, and it's become a very important conversation that folks are paying attention to across the city. But I don't know if the board actually has to approve the literacy plan. They have to approve the budget. They have to approve like large expenditures around curriculum and things like that. But they don't need to approve the way forward on how to, to teach literacy. And so I think those are all really, like this 5-4 vote is actually like a really important thing in terms of like how policy and how priorities are going to be developed moving forward.
Yeah, because up until now, this has been a superintendent who has been very focused on board. Like he tends to operate from the values of the board expressing things to him. He's a very board driven superintendent. And so now this vote, you wonder if if you're him, are you going to just what are those first one-on-ones going to look like? We know that each board member gets to have a one-on-one with a soup every month, and so boy, those will be interesting meetings to see like kind of like how they're all going to move forward,
Right.
right?
And also to think about, 6 of our board members have very specific like areas of the city that they represent. In
Mm-hmm.
order to get in order to get the 5 votes that he may need in a specific area, right? Like maybe we see a little something extra, start to like go to specific school board members that he knows a school board member cares about, right? Like we know that certain school board members care about English language learners. We know that certain school board members care specifically about North Minneapolis, right? Like he knows if he knows he needs to like get more votes on an item, like we might see some playing towards a vote to help get something through the finish line. My other concern is on a 5-4 like that is like maybe he'll put less controversial things up, propose less controversial things. And I don't mean controversial in the sense of like, dangerous or whatever. I mean controversial things in terms of like politically controversial, like
Yeah.
things that go against some of our norms as a district, things that, go against, like, honestly, if he would have had a 5-4 vote before the CDD would not be moved, would not have gone anywhere. He needed all 9 votes to say like, we support you, we support your leadership, and then like let the votes fall where they will. But a 5-4 vote is really, really dangerous if you're trying to push the district into a different direction. And so many of us are so tied to the status quo in ways that we don't even recognize until it's up for discussion, it's up for a vote. and then all of a sudden, it shifts. And so if you know you're going to bring something forward that's more controversial, um, and you already only, you're almost coming in at a deficit of 4 votes against you, then yeah, I don't know. I just think that while there's 5 votes in confidence of the superintendent, I think, you know, it was like a pretty strong show of no confidence by the
Yeah.
board.
Yeah.
And I think, how do you lead in that way, knowing that like half of your board doesn't necessarily support you? And again, there could be, it could be for really valid reasons. I'm sure that it'll be explained in the one-on-ones, like you said, but the public doesn't know why, because they didn't have a discussion about it. Only Director Cerrillo shared why she was voting in the way that she did. We didn't hear from Director Ali, Director Elamine, or Director Polly around why they're voting in the ways that they're voting.
It would be interesting. It would be interesting conversations to ask of them. If I Director Cerrillo is my board representative, and I know how she feels because she stated it. So if you have a board member that didn't state why they were voting, how they were voting, I think a lot of times coming up to big votes like this, we have a tendency to apply a lot of pressure to board members to try to like, well, okay, we feel a certain way about this. But there is also a conversation afterward to be like, if, do you think your board member did the governance that represents, your community? Do you know how they feel and why? And the follow-up conversations are also important with school board members. So I think, it might be an interesting thing to ask your school board member, like, why did you vote the way you did? And what are you hoping to see as a result of that vote?
Right. And I think that it's going to be interesting again to like see how all of this plays out, because if you change the venue from Davis Center in North Minneapolis to Washington D.C., we see this playing out in the Senate all the time, right? Like when we have we have like a split Senate, right? And all of a sudden we can't get things through, like expanding the
Mm.
Supreme Court or eliminating the filibuster or an infrastructure deal, or Green New Deal. Like we can't get those things through because there's not enough support. And then all of a sudden you try to like say, oh, hey, Senator Manchin, we want to maybe put a little extra something in West Virginia, or like what would it take to get West Virginia to support this, right? And that's, so you bring it down to the back to Davis Center and the school board meetings. Like that's what we're going. That's what we could be entering into, is a real split around like how we're going to move forward, and can we push things as controversial relatively as eliminating the filibuster, as expanding the Supreme Court, or are we also going to be tied up in like mundane things like our spending bills, right? Our budgets,
Mm.
our capital plan, our strategic plan. So I do think that, there's going to be some things to be paying really close attention to for folks, to ensure that like equity is actually taking place across the district. And so that like, again, certain pet projects in certain parts of the city aren't prioritized, in order to just get something passed or get something through.
Don't get us talking about the things that we need on playgrounds for Northside Elementary Schools.
Right.
Or maybe we should be talking about that. Like, there's some real issues and equity concerns for some Northside schools that need some things. So
Honestly, it's equality concerns if you ask me. Like it's not even equity, it's equality, because we know
that's right.
some of these other
That's
school buildings have fences and have close playgrounds and clean, new playgrounds, and that's not the experience that elementary schools have in North. So anyways, that's a tangent. That's an aside. Heather, did you have any other takeaways or things? Again, we really did not to discuss what we're going to say here, but do you have any other takeaways from a 5-4 vote and kind of what was shared and what we know about the vote last night?
I think the only other thing that I'll say is, you kind of get a rhythm of how things are going to go in the boardroom. You kind of have a feeling of what the board book's going to be. Um, Last night it was just a strange meeting. I mean, there was tension in the air with that vote. Um, there was that like change vote by our board director and chair. There was that like where she said no, and then but then her words didn't match that, and she was like, "Oh, I meant yes. I'm sorry. It's been really tiring." I mean, it was not only like a split vote. It was also just the tension in the room and the dynamics that you could feel. There was just kind of this like, and those of us who were in the audience were like, "Oh, it's going this way," and then all of a sudden we're like, "Oh no, wait, it's going the complete opposite way." And yeah, so it's just uh, again, there's that. I wonder, I wonder, gosh, if I were a board member, would I take it personally? Would I be able to say like, okay, no, this is a role of governance? I still want to work with these other folks, and like, where do we align together, and what's our priorities? And so it'll be interesting to see how what this board does from this moment forward.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, the evaluation did not match the votes last night. Like I think that's just a fair.
Yeah.
That's my assessment. I think that's the fairest assessment, that the evaluation did not match the votes, and so for our board members to not really expand as to why they were voting in the ways that they were, in both directions. Honestly, in both directions, um,
Yes.
I think
Nobody said anything.
I
We,
think I think constituents are owed an explanation at the very least, and there's a lot of we know that some people called in during public comment to talk about stability and wanting the board to extend another contract to the superintendent, for the stability of the district. And so is that what caused five board members to say yes? Like, I'm not sure. Like, again, we do not know. And if stability was the reason, right, like that's not any of the four areas of his
yeah.
evaluation, right? Like, and so, like, if I were receiving votes for whether I should continue in my position, and like, yes, we understand that stability is a value that this district, the city, really appreciates. By the way, um, I would want my votes to be aligned around like, because you're doing a good job in student well-being and student support. You're doing a great job with human resources and finances, and we see potential in literacy. We know that you're working hard towards it, or something like that. But again, the public did not get to hear that. I'm sure the superintendent has heard from the board members as to why, but stability doesn't tell me that I'm doing a great job. Stability just tells me you don't want to do a search. And so that's why I think people are owed an explanation as to why these votes landed the way that they are. And again, none of the school board members said stability, but the public said stability.
That's right.
So
That's right. Yes. Yep. And then again, yeah. And I think we have to really talk about the tension of, is stability something we value in a district that's just not serving students of color? I mean, and like, financial stability is amazing, and like, we're thankful for that. But what does stability mean in a really racist city for
yeah,
students of color? I mean, and so I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see.
yeah. And I think that again, if that's the reason why the board voted that way, I think the public should know.
Yeah.
And again, this isn't about for me. This isn't about Superintendent Graff. I think what it is about is understanding like, how do you lead with such a split board, and like, you know, does this level of like, I think the way that the votes went down, this doesn't project stability to me also.
Mm-mm,
And
mm-mm.
like, can we actually get an agenda that dismantles institutional racism in Minneapolis public schools with a board that is so fractured? Can you take the risks that you want to take without just one part of the community, one voice, one cadre of families, one cadre of teachers saying no, and then a vote flips in the other direction, right? Like, that is what is, I think, at risk right now, that the public should be paying really, really close attention to,
Yes.
um, because ultimately, like, if we can't get stuff done for students of color, in Minneapolis public schools, like I'm not really sure like what direction we're really trying to go in.
Mm. These meetings can get sometimes long and boring, but my gosh, they're always interesting to talk about.
Well, it's the subtext, right? And I think that's the challenge is like how do you listen for and analyze the subtext? And that's what we're trying to do. That's the best that we're doing the best that we can with the information that we have and trying to make broader sense of it. So anyway, thanks for listening to us process this in real time. And I hope you all got something out of it. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Bye.